Most people think a royal guard is just a statue in a red coat, something to take a photo with, something that doesn't blink. I used to think that too. For about 30 years I thought exactly that. And then one Tuesday morning, in the space of maybe 4 seconds, I watched one of them decide whether to stay alive or do his job. He didn't pick the one you'd expect. Let me back up. I'm getting ahead of myself, and you deserve to hear it the way it happened. My name doesn't matter much. I'm an old man with a camera, that's the honest version. For most of my life I worked other jobs, dull ones, the kind you forget the second you walk out the door. But on my days off and later when I retired, I'd go and photograph the soldiers, the guardsmen, the ones in the bearskin caps. I don't know why it became my thing. Maybe because they stood so still that they felt easy to draw with light, easy to wait for. Maybe because nobody else was really looking at them. Everybody photographs them, sure, but nobody looks. I knew their routine better than some of the tourists knew their own hotel address. I knew the way the boots came down. I knew the changeover times, the little half pause before a sentry turned, the way the whole thing breathed like a slow machine. After enough years, you start to recognize faces under those caps, even though you're not really supposed to. You'd never say anything. You just nod in your head like, ah, there you are again. That summer there was one young lad I'd started to notice. I didn't know his name then. I learned it later and I'll tell you, but I want to be careful because once you know a man's name you start telling his story like you owned it, and I don't. Let me just call him the tall one for now. He was tall and lean with this very straight neck and a way of holding his rifle that was somehow more correct than the others. I don't know how to explain it better than that. The others were good. He looked like the standard, the others were measured against. I'd photographed him maybe 5 or 6 times across a couple of months. Different posts. Once near the palace railings, once over by the barracks. He never moved a muscle for me, obviously, that's the whole point of the job. But there was one time, and I swear this is true, a wasp landed right on his cheekbone, just below the eye, and crawled along the edge of his nose, and he did not flinch. Not a twitch. A little kid next to me started crying because she thought the soldier was hurt, and her mum had to lift her up and carry her away. And through all of it, the tall one just stood there with a wasp walking across his face like he was a wall. I remember thinking, what kind of person trains themselves to do that? What's going on in their head? You look at a man like that and you assume there's nothing in there, just discipline like a clockwork thing. That's the mistake I made. That's the mistake nearly everybody makes. Anyway, the morning I'm telling you about. It was a Tuesday in late June. I remember because the schools weren't quite out yet, so the crowds were big but not insane. Mostly grown-up tourists, couples, the retired coach trip sort, a few office people cutting through on their way to somewhere. The weather was that London kind of warm where the sky can't decide. Bright over there, gray over here. A bit of haze. The plane trees were heavy and green and dropping that sticky stuff they drop. You could smell cut grass from the park, and hot tarmac, and somewhere a coffee cart. And under all of it, the faint diesel of the buses going round. I'd got there early, old habit. The lights softer early and the crowds haven't packed in yet, so you can actually find a spot. I set up near a railing on the edge of things towards the Hyde Park side where you can see a sentry box and beyond it the road and the trees of the park. There's always traffic there. Black cabs, the red buses, cyclists weaving, the occasional horse if you're lucky. The whole machine of the city just turning over, loud but ordinary. And the tall one was on. I clocked him straight away. Same straight neck, same correct hold. He had the box behind him, but he wasn't in it. He was out front on the worn patch of stone where 1,000 soldiers before him had stood and shifted their weight by a half-inch over the course of a long shift. The bearskin was pulled down low. The chin strap sat right where the jaw meets the throat. The sun caught the buttons. I took a couple of frames, nothing special. A man standing still. The most photographed pose in the country. There was a French family near me, I think French, a mum and dad and 2 boys, maybe 8 and 10, and the younger one was doing what kids always do, which is march up and down in front of the guard trying to make him laugh, stamping his little trainers, saluting wrong, pulling faces. The parents were laughing and filming it on their phones. The guard, of course, gave them nothing. Stone. The kid got more and more determined, the way they do, and finally he stood right in front and stuck out his tongue as far as it would go and held it there, cross-eyed, waiting. Nothing. The kid gave up, laughing, and ran back to his mum, and I remember thinking that boy will tell that story for years. He met the soldier who wouldn't laugh. He'll be 40 and he'll still tell it. Funny what sticks. I want you to hold on to that picture. The warm, hazy morning, the traffic going round, the coffee smell, the little French boy with his tongue out. A completely ordinary day, the kind that doesn't have any reason to be remembered. Because that's the thing about the bad days. They never start looking like bad days. They start looking exactly like this. Boring, even, pleasant. You trade a lot later to have them stay boring. I checked my watch. 11:15, near enough. I was thinking about the coffee cart, actually. I was thinking, give it another 10 frames and then I'll go and get a coffee and a slice of something and sit on the wall and watch the changeover later if the light holds. That's what was in my head. Coffee, a slice of something. And then the dog started. There was a dog, a little terrier sort of thing, on a lead with an old woman in a sun hat. It had been sniffing about the railings, perfectly happy, and then all at once it changed. It went stiff and low and started barking at the road, at the traffic, at nothing I could see, this frantic high barking, and pulling backwards on the lead so hard the old woman nearly went over. She was saying something to it, telling it off, embarrassed the way you get when your dog makes a scene. But the dog wouldn't stop. It kept staring at one spot across the road, by the park edge, near a parked car, and barking and backing away, barking and backing away. I've thought about that dog a lot since. Animals know things. People say that and it sounds like nonsense, but I was there and I'm telling you, that dog knew something was wrong before any of us did. It knew before the soldier did. It knew before me, before the tourists, before the men whose actual job it is to know. A couple of people glanced over. Most didn't. A barking dog in central London isn't news. The old woman finally got it moving and dragged it off down the path, the dog twisting its whole body to keep looking back. And for a minute everything went back to normal. Coffee, a slice of something. Then I noticed the car. I don't want to make myself sound clever, like I sensed danger, because I didn't, not really. What I noticed was just that it was wrong, in the small way photographers notice things wrong, because you spend your life looking at frames and a thing that doesn't belong jumps out. It was an ordinary car, dark, nothing flash, parked half up on the curb on the park side of the road, at an angle, not how you'd park if you were just popping somewhere. Both doors on the roadside were open. And there was nobody in it, and there was nobody around it. You know how, in a busy street, an open car door means a person. You expect a person, someone leaning in, someone unloading shopping, someone arguing on the phone with their feet still out. An open door with nobody attached to it is one of those things your eye snags on, and your brain quietly files under odd without telling you why. I lifted my camera, honestly just out of that itch to photograph the odd thing, and I zoomed in a little, and through the long lens I could see there was a bag in the back seat, a hold all, a sports bag, dark with the zip a bit open, and nothing else. No shopping, no person, no reason. I lowered the camera. And here's the part I keep coming back to. Across the road, on his worn patch of stone, the tall one had moved his eyes, not his head. His head was dead level, regulation, perfect, but his eyes had gone to the car. I was close enough and I'd watched him long enough that I could see it, the smallest shift. He was looking at the same thing the dog had looked at. He'd clocked it. And he didn't move. Now you might think, well, of course he didn't move, that's the whole job, they're not allowed. And that's true, but it's more than that, and I only understood it later. A sentry isn't a decoration. He's there for a reason that goes back centuries, and part of that reason is exactly this: to be the one fixed point when everything else starts to come apart. The crowd takes its cue from him. If he panics, 200 tourists panic, and you've got a stampede on a hard road full of buses before you've got anything else. So he stands. He stands precisely so that other people don't have to be brave, because being brave in a crowd is dangerous, and standing still is the bravest thing in the world when every animal instinct you own is screaming at you to run. I didn't know any of that yet. At the time, all I thought was, he's seen it. Good, he'll know what to do, someone will know what to do. I started looking around for who that someone might be. There's always more of them than you think around the palace. Police. Men who don't look like anything in particular until they move. And sure enough, a couple of figures had started to move, calm and quick, towards the road, and I felt that little flood of relief you get when the grown-ups take over. The tall one's lips moved, just barely. He was speaking into something low without breaking his pose, reporting it, whatever the proper word is. And then his head came round, slow and controlled, and he was looking not at the car now, at the crowd, at the people, at the French family, at the kid who'd stuck his tongue out who was now sitting on the curb playing with a toy, at an old couple, at a woman with a pram, the big sort with the rain cover up. I lifted my camera again because that's what I do, that's the only useful thing I've ever known how to do, and I framed him, the bearskin, the straight neck, the morning haze behind him, and his eyes, which were not the eyes of a statue at all. I've got that photo. I've never shown it to anyone. In the photo you can see that he has stopped being a thing to take a picture with and become a man doing arithmetic, counting people, measuring distance. Working out, I think now, how long it would take him to cross that road, and what he would do when he got there, and whether there was time. There wasn't time, I know that now. There's never as much time as you think. A woman behind me said quite cheerfully to her husband, "Ooh, something's going on, look, the police are running." And there was a kind of holiday excitement in her voice, the way people get when they think they're about to see a bit of drama at no cost to themselves. A few phones came up. People love filming the police. They had no idea. None of us really did. We thought we were spectators. We thought it was a show. The tall one took a step, one single step forward off his worn patch of stone towards the road. And I remember the strangest thing, I remember a little gasp going round the people near me, a sort of delighted, scandalized murmur because the guard had moved. The guard had actually moved off his spot, and to a crowd that thinks it's watching a show, that's the headline. The guard moved. Someone laughed. Someone said, "He's not allowed to do that, is he?" He took another step. He was at the curb now. He was looking at the car and at the open doors and at the bag with the half-open zip, and at the children playing on the pavement maybe 15 feet from it. And I think, I will never be sure, but I think that in that second he made the decision that the rest of this story is about. Because his rifle came up off his shoulder, and his whole body changed, dropped its ceremonial stillness and found a different kind of stillness, a faster one, the body of a man about to do something, and he opened his mouth to shout, and his arm came up to wave the people back, and the very first sound of the word was just leaving him. And then the morning ended. I don't have good words for the next bit. I've tried over the years. People always want you to describe the bang, and there isn't really a bang, not the way you'd think. It was more like the air itself slapped me. A pressure, a flat, hard shove that came through my chest before my ears even understood there'd been a sound. And then the sound arrived all wrong, too big to be a sound, a thing you feel in your teeth and your stomach. The ground jumped. I was on the floor and I don't remember going down. My camera was gone from my hands and I don't remember letting go of it. There was a high ringing where the world used to be, and under the ringing, very far away, the start of screaming. I lay there. I want to be honest with you about this, because everyone who tells these stories makes themselves brave and I won't. I lay there on the warm pavement with the smell of cut grass replaced by something hot and chemical and wrong, and I did absolutely nothing. I was an old man on the ground who could not make his arms work. There was grit in my mouth. Above me the plane trees were moving in a way trees shouldn't move, and bits of things were still coming down, soft and slow, leaves and paper and other things I didn't look at too hard. And somewhere in that ringing, In that first long second when the whole world had stopped being a place I understood, one thought came to me, clear as a bell, the way one daft clear thought sometimes will. The soldier was standing right there. He was right by it. I got my head up. It cost me everything to get my head up. The road was a mess of smoke and gray, and I couldn't see the car, couldn't see the curb, couldn't see the worn patch of stone where a man had stood every single day for as long as I'd been coming, where men had stood for hundreds of years before either of us was born. I couldn't see him. And the screaming was getting louder, and people were starting to run, and the holiday was over and the show was over, and I was an old man on the ground with no camera, and I thought very simply, oh no. Oh no, not the tall one. I didn't know his name yet. I didn't know about his grandfather, or his grandfather's grandfather, or the letter, or the trenches, or the line of men in that family who'd all, every one of them, been the kind to step towards the thing instead of away from it. I didn't know any of it. All I knew, lying there, was that the bravest man I'd ever pointed a camera at had taken one step too many, on purpose, towards the worst place to be, and that I had to get up. So I got up. Getting up was the hardest physical thing I've ever done, and I've done some hard things. It wasn't the pain, though there was pain, a deep ache all down one side where I'd hit the ground. It was that my body didn't believe me. I'd say to my arm, push, and my arm would just lie there like it belonged to someone else. I had to do it in stages. Get the hand flat. Get the elbow under. Tell the elbow it was allowed to hurt later, but right now it had a job. When I finally got my head and shoulders up, the world had changed color. Everything was gray-brown, this thick choking haze that hung in the air and didn't want to lift, and the sun came through it the color of a dirty coin. The smell was the worst part. I won't dwell on it. Hot metal and burnt things, and something underneath that I knew, on some old animal level, I shouldn't breathe too deeply. The sound came back in pieces. First the ringing, then under the ringing a car alarm going off somewhere, stupidly cheerful, and then all at once the human sounds arrived in a wave, like someone had turned the volume up too fast. Screaming, crying. A man's voice shouting the same word over and over, I couldn't tell what. Someone retching and running. The slap of a lot of feet on hard ground, all going the same way away. That running. I want to talk about that running, because it's the thing that nearly turned a terrible morning into a catastrophe, and it's the thing the soldier understood that none of the rest of us did. When a crowd that size starts to run, it stops being people. It becomes one animal, a big stupid frightened animal, and it doesn't care what's under its feet. There were people on the ground. Me, for one. There were children. There was the road with traffic that had screeched to a stop but was still there, big metal things in the smoke. And there was the park behind. And beyond the smoke nobody knew if there was more to come. Another bag, another car. And the truth is, in those first seconds nobody running knew where they were running to. They were just running away from the bang, which is the most natural thing in the world and very nearly the deadliest. I got onto my knees. I looked for the French family first. I don't know why, maybe because the little boy with his tongue out was the last clean, ordinary thing I'd seen. And I found them off to my left. The dad hunched over the older boy, the mum screaming a name and turning in circles, and I understood with a horrible jolt that she was turning in circles because she only had one of them. The younger one. The one who'd been sitting on the curb with his toy. The curb that was now on the wrong side of all that smoke, near where the car had been. And then through the haze low down I saw movement that wasn't running. Everything else was going one way, away, a blur of legs. This was going the other way. Slow, towards the road, towards the bad place. It was him. I almost didn't know him. The bearskin was gone. I found out later it had been blown clean off. They recovered it 40 feet away in a flower bed, and without it, he looked smaller and younger and more like a person and less like a soldier. His tunic was torn open at the shoulder and there was blood on the side of his face. A lot of it. That wet dark sheet of blood you get from a head, which always looks worse than it is, though I didn't know that then and my stomach went over. One of his legs wasn't right. He wasn't running on it. He was sort of driving himself forward off the good one, a lurching, determined, terrible way of moving, and he had his rifle still gripped across his body, and he was going towards the smoke. I shouted at him. I don't even know what I shouted. Something useless. Son, maybe, or no, or just a noise. He didn't hear me or didn't care, and looking back I'm glad, because if he'd stopped to listen to a frightened old man on his knees, the boy would have died. Because that's where he was going. The little French boy. I could see him now too, a small heap on the pavement near the curb, not moving, half hidden by drifting smoke, right in the place that everyone with any sense was sprinting away from. And here's the thing that I have turned over in my head 1,000 times since on bad nights when I can't sleep. The soldier got to a point, I watched him do it, where the crowd was streaming past him in the other direction, a wall of panic, and a couple of them actually shoved him, knocked him sideways, didn't even see him, and he nearly went down on that bad leg. A man running grabbed at his arm, I think trying to pull him along, to save him, shouting at him to come on, come on. And the soldier shook him off. He shook off the hand that was trying to save him, and he kept going the wrong way, into the smoke, towards a child who wasn't his, in a place where there might be a second bomb on a leg that wouldn't hold him. I have met a lot of people in my life who would tell you they'd do that. I have met almost nobody who actually would. I've thought hard about whether I would, and I'm not going to insult you by pretending I know the answer. But he didn't have to think about it. That's what got me later. There was no moment of decision in him that I could see. He just turned and went, the way water goes downhill, like it was the only direction that existed for a man built the way he was built. He reached the boy. He went down on his good knee. He didn't pick him up straight away. I learned afterwards that's right. You don't just snatch up someone hurt, you check. But he was over the boy, his body curved around him, his back to the road, to the smoke, to whatever might still be coming. Using himself as a wall. The same instinct that makes a sentry stand still in a panic, just turned outward now, turned into a shield made of one man's body. And then he did pick him up. Got him up against his chest, the boy's arms and legs hanging loose in a way that made my heart stop, and he came back out of the smoke, lurching, half falling, that ruined leg buckling and catching and buckling again, with the child held against him and his free hand. The one that should have been holding the rifle, except the rifle was gone now. I never saw him drop it, his free hand spread flat on the back of the boy's head, the way you hold an infant, protecting the skull. The crowd was still going, still that one frightened animal, and he walked into it, against it, and somehow it parted for him. I've thought about why. I think it was the uniform. Even torn and bloody and capless, the red of the tunic, the shape of him, it registered in their running animal brains as soldier, as someone in charge, as a fixed point, and for half a second each of them slowed and looked, and that half second was enough. He started shouting. Not panicked shouting. The other kind. The kind that comes from training, that lands in your chest and tells you what to do before you've decided to obey it. Move back, park side. Keep moving. Don't run, walk, don't run, walk. Don't run, walk. He kept saying it. With a child bleeding in his arms and his own blood running down into his collar, he was managing the crowd, turning the stampede back into people, one barked word at a time, and it worked. It actually worked. The running slowed. The animal became a frightened group of human beings again, and frightened human beings can be told what to do, and you can save frightened human beings, but you cannot save a stampede. I got to my feet at last. I made it over to where the mother was, the French mother, and I couldn't speak her language, but I didn't need to. I just pointed, and she saw. She saw the soldier coming through the smoke with her boy, and the sound she made I will hear until I die. She ran to him. He went down onto his knee again, careful even then, careful with the buckling leg so as not to jolt the child. And he laid the boy into her arms, and I saw his mouth moving, talking to her, fast and low, and I found out later. She told a reporter, weeks after, that he was telling her in clear, simple English, where the boy was hurt, that the boy was breathing, that help was coming, that she should keep his head still. Telling her the medical things, the calm things, while his own face poured blood, so that a stranger from another country would know what to do for her son. And the boy, by the grace of God, was alive. Concussed, a broken arm, cuts, a bad few days ahead, but alive. He grew up. I'll come to that. There's a part of this story that happens years later, and it's the part I love best, but I have to tell it in order or it won't mean anything. Now you think that was it. You think a man does that, crosses into the smoke, shields a child with his own body, carries him out, hands him back, manages a panicking crowd. You'd think he's earned the right to sit down, to let go, to be the one who gets helped now. He stood back up. I want to be very clear about what I saw, because in the days afterwards there was a lot in the papers, and some of it was made bigger than it was, and some of it was made smaller, and I was there, and I'd rather tell it straight than be dramatic. He stood back up, on that leg, and he turned around, away from the mother and the boy, and he faced the smoke again, and he put himself between the smoke and the crowd, and he stood there. He stood his post. I know it wasn't his post. His post was 40 feet away on a patch of stone that didn't exist anymore, but that's what it was. There was a danger and there were people, and the oldest job in his whole long line of work is to stand between the two. And so he found the danger and he found the people and he stood in the gap. And he started doing the thing again, the steady barking, get back, keep moving back. This way, calm, that's it, keep moving, while the first proper help came running in from all directions. The police, the men who hadn't looked like anything until they moved, and behind them soon. The green of paramedics and the shouting and the radios. A policeman reached him, took his arm, said something, and the soldier shook his head and pointed, telling them things, where the car had been, how many he'd seen down, the bag, the open doors, all of it, the proper report, the same low-controlled voice he'd used into his radio a lifetime ago when this had still been a quiet Tuesday and I'd still been thinking about coffee. He gave his report. And only when he'd given it, only when someone with the authority to do it had physically taken hold of him and told him, in effect, that he was relieved, only then did the leg finally win. He didn't fall dramatically. That's not how it went. He just sat down, suddenly heavily on the curb like a marionette with the strings cut, and put one hand flat on the ground to steady himself, and lowered his bloody head, and I saw his shoulders go up and down fast, and I realized he was just breathing. Just an exhausted, badly hurt young man, sitting on a curb in the smoke, finally allowed to breathe, with two paramedics dropping to their knees on either side of him. I was close enough by then to hear one of them, a woman, say to him very gently, the way you'd talk to a child, "All right, we've got you now. You can stop." And he looked up at her. And I saw his face properly for the first time. This young face under all the blood. And he said something that I didn't understand at the time and that I have never forgotten. And that is the reason I went looking afterwards for who he was and where he came from. He said, "Is the last one out? I have to know the last one's out." And she said, "Yes. Yes, love, the last one's out. You got them all out. You can stop now." And he stopped. I stood there in the thinning smoke, an old man with a bruised side and no camera, surrounded by sirens, and I looked at this boy sitting on the curb, and I thought about a wasp walking across his still face on a warm morning a few weeks before, and how I'd wondered what was going on inside a man who could train himself to be that still, and I'd assumed the answer was nothing. I had it exactly backwards. The stillness wasn't empty. The stillness was the lid on something, and when the lid came off, what came out wasn't fear, it was that. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, and somewhere in those gray hours I decided I was going to find out his name and where his straightness came from, because a thing like that doesn't grow out of nowhere. It grows out of somewhere. It grows out of someone. It turned out it grew out of a great many someones, and a war that had ended 100 years before, and a letter that a different soldier wrote to a different mother from a different patch of broken ground, a long time ago. But that's part 3. I found my camera 3 days later. Not the camera exactly, a policeman found it in the chaos, kicked under a railing, the lens cracked clean across, the body dented. They'd bagged it as I don't know what, and it took some doing to get it back. The lens was finished, But the card inside it wasn't. And on the card, near the end, was the frame I told you about. The one I've never shown anyone. The tall one, a half-second before the world ended, with his head level and his eyes doing arithmetic, counting the people he was about to try to save. I had that frame printed the proper way on good paper, and I put it in a drawer, and for a long time that's where it stayed. I'll tell you at the end why it came out of the drawer. The days after were a blur the way those days are. The news had it all, of course. A device in a vehicle, multiple injured, and this is the part that mattered, the part that made it a miracle instead of the other thing nobody killed. Not one. For a bomb of that size in a crowd of that size on a morning like that, the experts said it was extraordinary. They used that word a lot, extraordinary. And buried in the reports, in among the experts and the politicians and the flowers piling up against the railings, was a line about a guardsman. Off-duty accounts, they called it. A soldier who had broken position and gone into the blast area to bring out a child, and then organized the evacuation despite his injuries. They didn't name him at first. The army doesn't, not straight away. But the papers wanted him. The whole country wanted him. There were front pages with that grainy phone footage, the shape of a man in red coming out of the smoke with a child held against his chest, and headlines that I won't repeat because they were the loud kind. And eventually his name came out because these things always do, and I read it over my breakfast with my hands not quite steady. Guardsman Samuel Hale, 23 years old, from a town up north I'd never heard of. Samuel Hale. I said it out loud in my empty kitchen. I'd photographed that man a half-dozen times and never known to call him anything but the tall one, and now I had a name, and a name is a door, and I am the sort of stubborn old fool who, once he sees a door, has to go through it. It took me the best part of a year. I won't bore you with all of it. I wrote letters. I went to the right places and asked the wrong people and was sent away, kindly mostly, and tried again. He'd been in hospital a long time. The leg was bad, worse than it had looked, and there'd been the head, and there was the other thing, the thing they don't photograph, the thing that comes for a man in the weeks and months after in the dark, when his body is mending but the mourning keeps happening again behind his eyes. He didn't want to talk to anyone. I understood that. I nearly gave up. I should have given up by any sensible measure. What changed it was his grandmother. She wrote back to me, an old woman's handwriting, careful and slanted on proper notepaper. She said her grandson wasn't ready to meet anybody and might not be for a long time, and I should respect that, and she was right, and I knew she was right. But then she said something else. She said she'd heard there was a photographer who'd been there, who'd taken pictures of Samuel before in the ordinary days. And she said, if it wasn't too much trouble, might she see them? Because the family, she said, didn't have many pictures of the boy in his uniform looking happy, and she'd like one, for the mantelpiece, next to the others. Next to the others. I went up north on the train with a folder of prints. I'd chosen the best ones, the ones where he looked least like a statue, and most like a young man who'd been caught doing something difficult and beautiful with his whole life. And I sat in a small, warm front room with this small, fierce old woman and a pot of tea, and she went through them slowly, one at a time, with her thumb resting at the edge of each, not touching the surface, the way people handle photographs they're afraid to love too hard. And it was in that room that I learned about the others. Because she had a point about the mantelpiece. There was a row of them up there, men in uniform going back and back, the photographs getting older and browner and stiffer the further along the row you looked, until at the very end there was one that wasn't a photograph at all, but a little oval painting, hand-tinted, of a young man with a mustache and the same straight neck. I swear, the same neck in a high collar. That's Albert, she said when she saw me looking. My husband's grandfather, Samuel's great-great-grandfather, that would make him. She said it the way you'd point out a relative across a room, present tense almost. He was a guardsman too. They all were near enough, the Hale men. It goes back. Albert did the palace, same as Sam. Stood on that same stone, I shouldn't wonder. And then the war came. The first war, she meant, 1914. And she told me, and I'm going to tell you the way she told me plain, because plain is how it landed. When the war came in the August of 1914, Albert Hale was a ceremonial guardsman. He stood at the palace in the red coat and the bearskin, and he was, by all accounts, very good at it, very still, very correct. You'll have noticed the pattern by now. I certainly had, sitting in that front room with the tea going cold. And the guards were among the first sent over. There was no waiting about, no long training, not for them. 1 week these men were standing immaculate and motionless for the tourists and the changing of the guard, a piece of pageantry, a thing for postcards. And the next week, near enough, they were on a boat, and then they were in France, and the bearskins and the red coats were packed away, and they were in khaki, and they were in the ground. Straight from the courtyard to the trenches, from the most watched, most ornamental duty in the world to the worst place men had ever made, the same men, the same straight necks. The grandmother said it like it was the most natural thing imaginable, and I suppose in that family it was. They didn't think it was two different jobs, she said, standing still for the Queen and going to the war. To them it was the one job. You stand where you're put. You stand between. She tapped the arm of her chair. Between the people and the bad thing. That's all it ever was. The red coat or the khaki, it's the same job underneath. Between the people and the bad thing. I thought of a young man in a torn red tunic, standing in drifting smoke, putting himself in the gap, and I had to put my tea down. Albert survived the first year and the second. The Hale grandmother had his medals in a box and his name in the regimental records, and most of all she had his letters. A bundle of them, soft and furred at the folds from 100 years of being read. She let me hold one, just one. I didn't read the whole of it. It wasn't mine to read, and there are private things in a man's letters home even after a century. But she pointed to a line near the bottom, written in pencil that had gone silver with age, and she said, "This is the bit. This is the bit we read in this family. The boys all get told this bit. I'm not going to give you the whole letter, but I'll tell you the shape of that line, because Albert wrote it to his mother after a bad day in a wood that I won't name. A day when his lot had been ordered to hold a piece of nothing, a hedge, a ditch, a few yards of churned mud that mattered to a general's map and to no one else on earth, and they'd held it, and it had cost them, and Albert was one of the few who walked out. And what he wrote to his mother, this 20-something boy with the silver pencil, wasn't about glory, and it wasn't about the king, and it wasn't even really about being brave. What he wrote was that he was sorry he couldn't say much, and that she wasn't to worry, and that he'd done his bit, and that the thing he was proudest of, the thing he wanted her to know, was that when it was over and they counted up, he'd got his lads out. The ones he could. He'd stayed till the end of it and made sure of the last man. He said, and this is near enough his words, the grandmother had them by heart and said them with her eyes shut. He said a man can stand any amount of a bad day if he knows the last one's out. If he knows the last one's out. I sat in that front room and I heard, across 100 years, a young soldier on a curb in the smoke saying, "Is the last one out? I have to know the last one's out." And I understood that he hadn't made that up. He hadn't reached for it in the moment. It was in him. It had been put in him, line by line, mantelpiece photograph by mantelpiece photograph, by a family that had been standing in the gap for so long they didn't know there was any other way to stand. Samuel Hale didn't decide in the smoke to be brave. He'd been given his orders 100 years before he was born, by a man in a high collar with a silver pencil, and he'd been carrying them his whole life without knowing it, the way you carry the shape of your own face. The grandmother chose a photograph, the one where he's near the railings and the light is soft and there's the very smallest something at the corner of his mouth that isn't a smile but is the next thing to it. She said that was the one. That was Sam. She'd put it on the mantelpiece, she said, down this end, the new end. And one day, she said, and she said it without any drama at all, like it was just the way of things, one day there'd be a Hale boy who'd stand in front of that row and be told about all of them, Sam and Albert and the rest, and be told the bit about the last one out, and the line would go on. I gave her the whole folder. I didn't want it back. Now I promised you the part I love best, and here it is, and then I'll let you go. Years passed. The railings got mended. The road got resurfaced. The flowers went the way flowers do, and the front pages moved on to the next loud thing, and the world forgot, because the world has to forget or it couldn't get up in the morning. Samuel Hale never went back to ceremonial duty. The leg wouldn't have it, but he didn't disappear either. He found other ways to stand where he was put, quieter ways, and he got married, and the grandmother lived to see it, which I'm glad of. And one summer, a long time after, I was back at the railings. Old habit. New camera by then. I don't photograph the guards so much anymore, but I still go, on the soft light mornings, to watch the slow machine turn over. And there was a sentry on, a young one I didn't know, doing the still and correct thing on the worn patch of stone, and a crowd of tourists, and the warm haze, and the coffee cart. The whole ordinary lovely business of it all having grown back over the scar like grass over a grave. And there was a young man near me at the railing, maybe 19 or 20, with a woman who I took to be his mother, and they weren't taking photographs. They were just standing, looking at the sentry and looking past him at the road, at the park, at a particular spot near the curb. The young man had a slight thing about one arm, the way it hung, an old healed thing, and the woman had her hand on his back, and she was crying very quietly, in the way you do when the tears are old friends and not strangers. I didn't say anything. You don't. But I heard her speak to him in French low, and I caught the one word any fool can catch in any language, a name, and then in careful English for his benefit, or maybe just because she wanted to say it in the country where it had happened, she said, "Here. It was here. He carried you out just here." And the young man with the bad arm looked at the spot for a long time. And then he did something I'll keep with me until I'm in the ground myself. He took a small bunch of flowers out of his jacket. He'd had them tucked inside. He'd carried them all the way from France inside his coat so they wouldn't be crushed. And he laid them down at the foot of the railing, near the curb, near nothing, near a place that to everyone else was just pavement. And he stood up and he looked at the sentry on the stone, the young one, who of course gave him nothing, who was still as a wall, correct and level and empty looking, the way they always look. But I knew that the stillness wasn't empty. I'd learned that lesson the hard way on a Tuesday in the smoke. And I wanted to tell the French boy, who wasn't a boy anymore, I wanted to cross over and say, "You see that one standing so still he looks like nothing? There's 100 years inside him. There's a man with a silver pencil inside him. There's the last ones out inside him. Don't believe the stillness. The stillness is just the lid." I didn't say it. I went home instead, and I opened the drawer, the one I told you about, and I took out the print I'd never shown anyone, the tall one, head level, eyes counting, a half-second before, and I finally put it in a frame. And I hung it on my wall where I can see it from my chair. People come to my house and they look at it and they say, "Oh, is that one of the guards, the ones who don't move?" And I say, "Yes, that's one of the ones who don't move." And I don't tell them the rest, because some things you don't put into words for strangers. You just hang them on the wall where you can see them, and you let them stand there, very still, holding the gap, the way that family has always done it, the way I expect they always will. That's all of it. That's what I saw the day a bomb went off near Hyde Park, and a royal guard stood his post. He's still standing it somewhere in one form or another. They always are.